Jeeves in the Offing by P.G. Wodehouse, read by Ian Carmichael. Chapter 1. Jeeves placed the sizzling eggs and bee on the breakfast table, and Reginald, Kipper, Herring, and I, licking the lips, squared our elbows and got down to it. A lifelong buddy of mine, this Herring, linked to me by what are called imperishable memories. Years ago, when striplings, he and I had done a stretch together at Malvern House, Bramley-on-Sea, the preparatory school conducted by that prince of stinkers, Aubrey Upjohn, M.A., and had frequently stood side by side in the Upjohn study, awaiting the receipt of 6 of the juiciest from a cane of the type that biteth like a serpent and stingeth like an adder, as the fellow said. So we were, you might say, rather like a couple of old sweats who had fought shoulder to shoulder on Crispin's Day, if I've got the name right. The plat du jour having gone down the hatch, accompanied by some fluid ounces of strengthening coffee, I was about to reach for the marmalade when I heard the telephone tootling out in the hall and rose to attend to it. "Bertram Wooster's residence," I said, having connected with the instrument. "Wooster in person at this end." "Oh, hello," I added, for the voice that boomed over the wire was that of Mrs. Thomas Portarlington Travers of Brinkley Court, Market Snodsbury, near Droitwich. Or, putting it in another way, my good and deserving Aunt Dahlia. "A very hearty pip-pip to you, old ancestor," I said, well pleased, for she is a woman with whom it is always a privilege to chew the fat. "And a rousing toodaloo to you, you young blot on the landscape," she replied cordially. "I'm surprised to find you up as early as this. Or have you just got in from a night on the tiles?" I hastened to rebut this slur. "Certainly not. Nothing of that description whatsoever. I've been upping with the lark this last week to keep Kipper Herring company. He's staying with me till he can get into his new flat. You remember old Kipper? I brought him down to Brinkley one summer. A chap with a cauliflower ear." "I know who you mean. Looks like Jack Dempsey." "That's right. Far more, indeed, than Jack Dempsey does. He's on the staff of the Thursday Review, a periodical of which you may or may not be a reader, and has to clock in at the office at daybreak. No doubt, when I apprise him of your call, he will send you his love, for I know he holds you in high esteem. The perfect hostess, he often describes you as. Well, it's nice to hear your voice again, old flesh and blood. How's everything down at Market Snodsbury way?" "Oh, we're jogging along. But I'm not speaking from Brinkley, I'm in London." "Till when?" "Driving back this afternoon." "I'll give you lunch." "Sorry, can't manage it. I'm putting on the nose bag with Sir Roderick Glossop." This surprised me. The eminent brain specialist to whom she alluded was a man I would not have cared to lunch with myself, our relations having been on the stiff side since the night at Lady Wickham's place in Hertfordshire, when, acting on the advice of my hostess's daughter Roberta, I had punctured his hot water bottle with a darning needle in the small hours of the morning. Quite unintentional, of course. I had planned to puncture the HWB of his nephew, Tuppy Glossop, with whom I had a feud on. And unknown to me, they'd changed rooms. Just one of those unfortunate misunderstandings. "What on earth are you doing that for?" "Well, why shouldn't I? He's paying." Yes, I saw her point. A penny saved is a penny earned, and all that sort of thing. But I continued surprised. It amazed me that Aunt Dahlia, presumably a free agent, should have selected this very formidable loony doctor to chew the midday chop with. However, one of the first lessons life teaches us is that aunts will be aunts, so I merely shrugged a couple of shoulders. "Well, it's up to you, of course, but it seems a rash act. Did you come to London just to revel with Glossop?" No, I'm here to collect my new butler and take him home with me." "New butler? What's become of Seppings?" "He's gone." I clicked the tongue. I was very fond of the majordomo in question, having enjoyed many a port in his pantry, and this news saddened me. "No, really," I said. "Oh, too bad. I thought he looked a little frail when I last saw him. Well, that's how it goes. All flesh is grass, I often say." "To Bognor Regis for his holiday." I unclicked the tongue. "Oh, I see. Well, that puts a different complexion on the matter. Odd how all these pillars of the home seem to be dashing away on toots these days. It's like what Jeeves was telling me about the great race movement of the Middle Ages. Jeeves starts his holiday this morning. He's off to Herne Bay for the shrimping, and I'm feeling like that bird in the poem who lost his pet gazelle, or whatever the animal was. I don't know what I'm going to do without him." "I'll tell you what you're going to do without him. Have you a clean shirt?" "Several." "And a toothbrush?" "2, both of excellent quality." "Then pack 'em. You're coming to Brinkley tomorrow." The gloom which always envelops Bertram Wooster like a fog when Jeeves is about to take his annual vacation lightened perceptibly. There are few things I find more agreeable than a sojourn at Aunt Dahlia's rural lair. Picturesque scenery, gravel soil, main drainage, company's own water, and above all, the superb French chefing of her French chef Anatole, God's gift to the gastric juices. A full hand, as you might put it. What an admirable suggestion, I said. You solve all my problems and bring the blue bird out of a hat. Rely on me. You will observe me bowling up in the Wooster sports model tomorrow afternoon with my hair in a braid and a song on my lips. My presence will, I feel sure, stimulate Anatole to new heights of endeavour. Got anybody else staying at the old snake pit? 5 inmates in all. 5? I resumed my tongue-clicking. Golly! Uncle Tom must be frothing at the mouth a bit, I said, for I knew the old buster's distaste for guests in the home. Even a single weekender is sometimes enough to make him drain the bitter cup. Tom's not there. He's gone to Harrogate with cream. You mean lumbago? I do not mean lumbago. I mean cream. Homer cream. Big American tycoon who's visiting these shores. He suffers from ulcers, and his medicine man has ordered him to take the waters at Harrogate. Tom has gone with him to hold his hand and listen to him of an evening while he tells him how filthy the stuff tastes. Antagonistic. What? I mean altruistic. You're probably not familiar with the word, but it's one I've heard Jeeves use. It's what you say of a fellow who gives selfless service, not counting the cost. Selfless service, my foot. Tom's in the middle of a very important business deal with Cream. If he goes through, he'll make a packet free of income tax. So he's sucking up to him like a Hollywood yes-man. I gave an intelligent nod, though this, of course, was wasted on her because she couldn't see me. I could readily understand my uncle-by-marriage's mental process. T. Portarlington Travers is a man who has accumulated pieces of 8 in sackfuls, but he's always more than willing to shove a bit extra away behind the bricks in the fireplace, feeling, and rightly, that every little bit added to what you've got makes just a little bit more. And if there's one thing that's right up his street, it's not paying income tax. He grudges every penny the government nicks from him. That is why, when kissing me goodbye, he urged me with tears in his eyes to lush Mrs. Cream and her son Willie up and treat them like royalty, so that Brinkley dug into the woodwork. Willie, did you say? Short for Wilbert. I mused. Willie Cream. The name seemed familiar somehow. I seem to have heard it or seen it in the papers somewhere, but it eluded me. Adela Cream writes mystery stories. Are you a fan of hers? No? Well, start boning up on them directly you arrive, because every little helps. I brought a complete set. They're very good. I shall be delighted to run an eye over her material, I said, for I am what they call a something of novels of suspense. Aficionado, would that be it? I can always do with another corpse or two. We have established, then, that among the inmates are this Mrs. Cream and her son Wilbert. Who are the other 3? Well, there's Lady Wickham's daughter, Roberta. I started violently, as if some unseen hand had goosed me. What? Bobby Wickham? Oh, my gosh. Why the agitation? Do you know her? Oh, you bet I know her. I begin to see. Is she one of the gaggle of girls you've been engaged to? Not actually, no. We were never engaged. But that was merely because she wouldn't meet me halfway. Turned you down, did she? Yes, thank goodness. Why, thank goodness? She's one-girl beauty chorus. She doesn't try the eyes, I agree. A pippin, if ever there was one. Very true. But is being a pippin everything? What price the soul? Isn't her soul like mother makes? No, far from it. Much below par. What I could tell you... But no, let it go. Painful subj. I had been about to mention 57 or so of the reasons why the prudent operator, if he valued his peace of mind, deemed it best to stay well away from the red-headed menace under advisement, but realized that at a moment when I was wanting to get back to the marmalade, it would occupy too much time. It will be enough to say that I had long since come out of the ether and was fully cognizant of the fact that in declining to fall in with my suggestion that we should start rounding up clergymen and bridesmaids, the Beazle had rendered me a signal service, and I will tell you why. Aunt Dahlia, describing this young blister as a one-girl beauty chorus, had called her shots perfectly correctly. Her outer crust was indeed of a nature to cause those beholding it to rock back on their heels with a startled whistle. But while equipped with eyes like twin stars, hair ruddier than the cherry, oomph, espièglerie, and all the fixings, B. Wickham had also the disposition and general outlook on life of a ticking bomb. In her society you always had the uneasy feeling that something was likely to go off at any moment with a pop. You never knew what she was going to do next, or into what murky depths of soup she would carelessly plunge you. "Miss Wickham, sir," Jeeves had once said to me warningly at the time when the fever was at its height, "lacks seriousness. She is volatile and frivolous. I would always hesitate to recommend as a life partner a young lady with quite such a vivid shade of red hair." His judgment was sound. I've already mentioned how, with her subtle wiles, this girl had induced me to sneak into Sir Roderick Glossop's sleeping apartment and apply the darning needle to his hot water bottle, and that was comparatively mild going for her. In a word, Roberta, daughter of the late Sir Cuthbert and Lady Wickham of Skelding's Halled Hearts, was pure dynamite, and better kept at a distance by all those who aimed at leading the peaceful life. The prospect of being immured with her in the same house, with all the facilities a country house affords, an enterprising girl for landing her nearest and dearest into the Mulligatawny, made me singularly dubious about the shape of things to come. And I was tottering under this blow when the old relative administered another, and it was a haymaker. "And there's Aubrey Upjohn and his stepdaughter Phyllis Mills," she said. "That's the lot. What's the matter with you? Got asthma?" I took her to be alluding to the sharp gasp which had escaped my lips, and I must confess that it had come out not unlike the last words of a dying duck. But I felt perfectly justified in gasping. A weaker man would have howled like a banshee. There floated into my mind something Kipper Herring once said to me. "You know, Bertie," he said in philosophical mood, "we have much to be thankful for in this life of ours, you and I. However rough the going, there is one sustaining thought to which we can hold. The storm clouds may lower and the horizon grow dark. We may get a nail in our shoe and be caught in the rain without an umbrella. We may come down to breakfast and find that someone else has taken the brown egg. But at least we have the consolation of knowing that we shall never see Aubrey Gore-Elpis Upjohn again. Always remember this in times of despondency," he said, and I always had. And now, here the bounder was, bobbing up right in my midst, enough to make the stoutest heart go into a dying duck routine. "Aubrey Upjohn," I quavered. You mean my Aubrey Upjohn?" "That's the one. Soon after you made your escape from his chain gang, he married Jane Mills, a friend of mine with a colossal amount of money. She died, leaving a daughter. I'm the daughter's godmother. Upjohn's retired now and going in for politics. The hot tip is that the boys in the back room are going to run him as the Conservative candidate in the Market Snodsbury division at the next by-election. What a thrill it'll be for you, meeting him again. Or does the prospect scare you?" "Certainly not. We Woosters are intrepid. But what on earth did you invite him to Brinkley for?" "I didn't. I only wanted Phyllis, but he came along too." "Well, you should have bunged him out." "I hadn't the heart to." Weak, very weak. "Besides, I need him in my business. He's going to present the prizes at Market Snodsbury Grammar School. We've been caught short, as usual, and somebody has got to make a speech on ideals and the great world outside to those blasted boys, so he fits in nicely. I believe he's a very fine speaker. His only trouble is that he's stymied unless he has his speech with him and can read it. Calls it referring to his notes. Phyllis told me that. She types the stuff for him." "A thoroughly low trick," I said severely. "Even I, who have never soared above the yeoman's wedding song at a village concert, wouldn't have the crust to face my public unless I'd taken the trouble to memorize the words. Though, actually, with the yeoman's wedding song, it is possible to get by quite comfortably by keep singing ding-dong, 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 I hurry along. In short..." I would have spoken further, but at this point, after urging me to put a sock in it and giving me a kindly word of warning not to step on any banana skins, she rang off. Chapter 2. I came away from the telephone on what practically amounted to leaden feet. Here I was feeling was a nice bit of boxed fruit. Bobby Wickham, with her tendency to stir things up, and with each new day to discover some new way of staggering civilization, would by herself have been bad enough. Add Aubrey Upjohn, and the mixture became too rich. I don't know if Kipper, when I rejoined him, noticed that my brow was cichlid o'er with the pale cast of thought, as I have heard Jeeves put it. Probably not, for he was tucking into toast and marmalade at the moment, but it was. As had happened so often in the past, I was conscious of an impending doom. Exactly what form this would take I was, of course, unable to say. It might be one thing, or it might be another. But a voice seemed to whisper to me that somehow, at some not distant date, Bertram was slated to get it in the gizzard. "That was Aunt Dahlia, Kipper," I said. "Oh, bless her jolly old heart," he responded. "One of the very best. You can quote me as saying so. I shall never forget those happy days at Brinkley, and shall be glad at any time that suits her to catch another invitation. Is she up in London?" Till this afternoon. We fill her to the brim with rich foods, of course." No, she's got a lunch date. She's browsing with Sir Roderick Glossop, the loony doctor. You don't know him, do you?" "Oh, only from hearing you speak of him. A tough egg, I gather. One of the toughest. He was the chap, wasn't he, who found the 24 cats in your bedroom? 23, I corrected. I like to get things right. They were not my cats. They'd been deposited there by my cousins, Claude and Eustace, but I found them difficult to explain. He's a rather bad listener. I hope I shan't find him at Brinkley, too. Are you going to Brinkley? Tomorrow afternoon?" "Yeah, well, you'll enjoy that." Well, shall I? The point is a very moot one." "You're crazy. Think of Anatole. Those dinners of his. Is the name of the Peri who stood disconsolate at the gate of Eden familiar to you?" "I have heard Jeeves mention her." "Well, that's how I feel when I remember Anatole's dinners. When I reflect that every night he's dishing them up and I'm not there, I come within a very little of breaking down. What gives you the idea that you won't enjoy yourself? Brinkley Court's an earthly paradise." In many respects, yes, but life there at the moment has its drawbacks. There's far too much of that where every prospect pleases and only man is vile stuff buzzing around, for my taste. Who do you think is staying at the old Doss house, Aubrey Upjohn." It was plain that I'd shaken him. His eyes widened, and an astonished piece of toast fell from his grasp. "Old Upjohn? You're kidding." No, he's there. Himself. Not a picture. And it seemed only yesterday that you were buoying me up by telling me I'd never see him again. The storm clouds may lure, you said, if you recollect. But how does he come to be at Brinkley? Precisely what I asked the aged relative, and she had an explanation that seemed to cover the facts. Apparently, after we took our eye off him, he married a friend of hers, one Jane Mills, and acquired a stepdaughter, Phyllis Mills, whose godmother Aunt Dahlia is. The ancestor invited the Mills girl to Brinkley, and Upjohn came along for the ride." "I see. Well, I don't wonder you're trembling like a leaf." Not like a leaf, exactly, but, yes, I think you might describe me as trembling. One remembers that fishy eye of his, and the wide, bare upper lip. It won't be pleasant having to gaze on those across the dinner table. Still, you like Phyllis. Do you know her? We met out in Switzerland last Christmas. Slap her on the back, will you, and give her my regards. Nice girl, though goofy. She never told me she was related to Upjohn. Well, she would naturally keep a thing like that dark. Yes, one sees that. Just as one would have tried to keep it dark if one had been mixed up in any way with Palmer the poisoner. What ghastly garbage that was he used to fling at us when we were serving our sentence at Malvern House. Remember the sausages on Sunday? And the boiled mutton with caper sauce? And the margarine. Recalling this last is going to be a strain, having to sit and watch him getting outside pounds of best country butter. "Oh, Jeeves," I said, as he shimmered in to clear the table. "You never went to a preparatory school on the south coast of England, did you?" No, sir, no. I was privately educated." "Ah, then you wouldn't understand. Mr. Herring and I were discussing our former prep school beak, Aubrey Upjohn, M.A. By the way, Kipper, Aunt Dahlia was telling me something about him which I never knew before, and which ought to expose him to the odium of all thinking men. You remember those powerful end-of-term addresses he used to make to us? Well, he couldn't have made them if he hadn't had the stuff all typed out in his grasp, so that he could read it. Without his notes, as he calls them, he's a spent force. Revolting, that, Jeeves, don't you think? Many orators are, I believe, similarly handicapped, sir. Too tolerant, Jeeves, too tolerant by far. You must guard against this lax outlook. However, the reason I mention Upjohn to you is that he's come back into my life, or will be coming back in about 2 ticks. He's staying at Brinkley, and I shall be going there tomorrow. That was Aunt Dahlia on the telephone just now, and she demands my presence. Will you pack a few necessaries in a suitcase or so? Very good, sir. When are you leaving on your Herne Bay jaunt? I was thinking of taking a train this morning, sir, but if you would prefer that I remain until tomorrow... No, that's perfectly all right. Start as soon as you like. What's the joke? I asked, as the door closed behind him, for I observed that Kipper was chuckling softly. Not an easy thing to do, of course, when your mouth's full of toast and marmalade, but he was doing it. I was thinking of Upjohn, he said. I was amazed. It seemed incredible to me that anyone who'd done time at Malvern House, Bramley-on-Sea, could chuckle, softly or otherwise, when letting the mind dwell on that outstanding menace. It was like laughing lightly while contemplating one of those horrors from outer space which are so much with us at the moment on the motion picture screen. I envy you, Bertie, he went on, continuing to chuckle. You have a wonderful treat in store. You're going to be present at the breakfast table when Upjohn opens his copy of this week's Thursday Review and starts to skim through the pages devoted to comments on current literature. I should explain that among the books that recently arrived at the office was a slim volume from his pen dealing with the preparatory school and giving it an enthusiastic build-up. The formative years which we spent there, he said, were the happiest of our life. Gadzooks! He little knows that his brainchild would be given to one of the old lags of Malvern House to review. Now, I will tell you something, Bertie, that every young man ought to know. Never be a stinker, because if you are, though you may flourish for a time like a green bay tree, sooner or later retribution will overtake you. I need scarcely tell you that I ripped the stuffing out of the beastly little brochure. The thought of those sausages on Sunday filled me with the righteous fury of a juvenile. Of a who? Nobody, you know, before your time. I seemed inspired. Normally, I suppose, a book like that would get me a line and a half in the other recent publications column, but I gave it 600 words of impassioned prose. How extraordinarily fortunate you are to be in a position to watch his face as he reads them. How do you know he'll read them? He's a subscriber. There was a letter from him on the correspondence page a week or two ago in which he specifically stated that he'd been one for years. Did you sign the thing? No. Ye Ed is not keen on underlings advertising their names. And it was really hot stuff, red hot. So eye him closely at the breakfast table. Mark his reaction. I confidently expect the blush of shame and remorse to mantle his cheek. The only catch is that I don't come down to breakfast when I'm at Brinkley. Still, I suppose I could make a special effort. Do so. You will find it well worthwhile, said Kipper, and shortly afterwards popped off to resume the earning of the weekly envelope. He'd been gone about 20 minutes when Jeeves came in, a bowler hat in hand, to say goodbye. A solemn moment, taxing our self-control to the utmost. However, we both kept the upper lip stiff, and after we'd kidded back and forth for a while, he started to withdraw. He'd reached the door when it suddenly occurred to me that he might have inside information about this Wilbert Cream of whom Aunt Dahlia had spoken. I have generally found that he knows everything about everyone. Oh, Jeeves, I said, half a jiffy. Sir, something I want to ask you. It seems that among my fellow guests at Brinkley will be Mrs. Homer Cream, wife of an American big butter and egg man. Her son Wilbert, commonly known as Willie, and the name Willie Cream seems somehow to touch a chord. Rightly or wrongly, I associate it with trips we have taken to New York, but in what connection I haven't the vaguest. Does it, ring a bell with you? Why, yes, sir. References to the gentleman are frequent in the tabloid newspapers of New York, notably in the column conducted by Mr. Walter Winchell. He is generally alluded to under the sobriquet of Broadway Willie. Ah, of course, yes, it all comes back to me. He is what they call a playboy. Precisely, sir. Notorious for his escapades. Yes, I've got him placed now. He's the fellow who likes to let off stink bombs in nightclubs, which rather falls under the head of carrying coals to Newcastle, and seldom cashes a cheque at his bank without producing a gat and saying, "This is a stick-up." And, no, sir. No, I regret that it has for the moment escaped my memory. What has? Some other little thing, sir, that I was told regarding Mr. Cream. No, I shall recall it. I will communicate with you. Yes, do. One wants the complete picture. Oh, gosh. Sir? Nothing, Jeeves. No, just a thought has floated into my mind. All right, push off, or you'll miss your train. Good luck to your shrimping net. I'll tell you what the thought was that had floated. I have already indicated my qualms at the prospect of being cooped up in the same house with Boddy Wickham and Aubrey Upjohn, for who could tell what the harvest might be? If, in addition to these two heavies, I was also to be cheek-by-jowl with a New York playboy, apparently afflicted with bats in the belfry, it began to look as if this visit would prove too much for Bertram's frail strength, and for an instant I toyed with the idea of sending a telegram of regret and oiling out. Then I remembered Anatole's cooking and was strong again. Nobody who has once tasted them would wantonly deprive himself of that wizard's smoked offerings. Whatever spiritual agonies I might be about to undergo at the Brinkley Court market snobbery near Droitwich residence, they would at least put me several suprême de foie gras au champagne and mignonette de poulet petit duc ahead of the game. Nevertheless, it would be paltering with the truth to say that I was at my ease as I thought of what lay before me in darkest Worcestershire, and the hand that lit the after-breakfast gasper shook quite a bit. At this moment of nervous tension, the telephone suddenly gave tongue again, causing me to skip like the high hills as if the last trumpet sounded. I went to the instrument all of a twitter. Some species of butler appeared to be at the other end. "Mr. Wooster, on the spot." "Good morning, sir. Her ladyship wishes to speak to you. Lady Wickham, sir." "Here is Mr. Wooster, my lady." And Bobby's mother came on the air. I should have mentioned, by the way, that during the above exchange of ideas with the butler, I had been aware of a distant sound of sobbing, like background music, and it now became apparent that it was from the larynx of the relict of the late Sir Cuthbert that it was proceeding. There was a short intermission before she got the vocal cords working, and while I was waiting for her to start the dialogue, I found myself wrestling with two problems that presented themselves. The first, what on earth is this woman ringing me up for? And second, having got the number, why does she sob? It was problem A that puzzled me particularly, for ever since that hot water bottle episode, my relations with this parent of Bobby's had been on the strained side. It was indeed an open secret that my standing with her was practically that of a rat of the underworld. I had had this from Bobby, whose impersonation of her mother discussing me with sympathetic cronies had been exceptionally vivid, and I must confess that I wasn't altogether surprised. No hostess, I mean to say, extending her hospitality to a friend of her daughter's, likes to have the young visitor going about the place puncturing people's water bottles and leaving at 3 a.m. without stopping to say goodbye. Yes, I could see her side of the thing all right, and I found it extraordinary that she should be seeking me out on the telephone in this fashion. Feeling as she did, so allergic to Bertram, I wouldn't have thought she'd have phoned me with a 10-foot pole. However, there beyond a question she was. "Mr. Wooster? Oh, hello, Lady Wickham. Are you there?" I put her straight on this point, and she took time out to sob again. She then spoke in a hoarse, throaty voice, like Tallulah Bankhead after swallowing a fishbone the wrong way. "Is this awful news true?" "Eh? Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. I don't quite follow." "In this morning's Times." Now, I am pretty shrewd, and it seemed to me, reading between the lines, that there must have been something in the issue of the Times published that morning that for some reason had upset her. Though why she should have chosen me to tell her troubles to was a mystery not easy to fathom. I was about to institute inquiries in the hope of spearing a solution, when, in addition to sobbing, she started laughing in a hyena-esque manner, making it clear to my trained ear that she was having hysterics. And before I could speak, there was a dull thud, suggestive of some solid body falling to earth, I knew not where, and when the dialogue was resumed, I found that the butler had put himself on as an understudy. "Mr. Wooster? Still here? I regret to say that her ladyship has fainted." It was she I heard going bump?" "Precisely, sir." "Thank you very much, sir. Goodbye." He replaced the receiver and went about his domestic duties. These, no doubt, including the loosening of the stricken woman's corsets and burning feathers under her nose, leaving me to chew on the situation without further bulletins from the front. It seemed to me that the thing to do here was to get hold of the Times and see what it had to offer in the way of enlightenment. It's a paper I don't often look at, preferring for breakfast reading the Mirror and the Mail, but Jeeves takes it in, and I have occasionally borrowed his copy with a view to having a shot at the crossword puzzle. It struck me as a possibility that he might have left today's issue in the kitchen, and so it proved. I came back with it, lowered myself into a chair, lit another cigarette, and proceeded to cast an eye on its contents. At a cursory glance, what might be called swoon material appeared to be totally absent from its columns. The Duchess of something had been opening a bazaar at Wimbledon in aid of a deserving charity. There was an article on salmon fishing on the Wye, and a cabinet minister had made a speech about conditions in the cotton industry. But I could see nothing in these items to induce a loss of consciousness. Nor did it seem probable that a woman would have passed out cold on reading that Herbert Robinson, 26, of Grove Road, Ponders End, had been jugged for stealing a pair of green and yellow check trousers. I turned to the cricket news. Had some friend of hers failed to score in one of yesterday's county matches owing to a doubtful LBW decision? It was just after I had run the eye down the births and marriages that I happened to look at the engagements, and a moment later I was shooting out of my chair as if a spike had come through its cushioned seat and penetrated the flesher parts. "Jeeves!" I yelled, and then remembered that he had long since gone with the wind. A bitter thought, for if ever there was an occasion when his advice and counsel were of the essence, this ock was that ock. The best I could do, tackling it solo, was to utter a hollow G and bury the face in the hands. And though I seem to hear my public tut-tutting in disapproval of such neurotic behaviour, I think the verdict of history will be that the paragraph on which my gaze had rested was more than enough to excuse a spot of face-burying. It ran as follows: Forthcoming marriages. The engagement is announced between Bertram Wilberforce Wooster of Berkeley Mansions, West 1, and Roberta, daughter of the late Sir Cuthbert Wickham and Lady Wickham of Skeldings Hall, Herts. Chapter 3. Well, as I was saying, I had several times, when under the influence of her oomph, taken up with Roberta Wickham the idea of such a merger. But, and here is the point I would stress, I could have sworn that on each occasion she had declined to cooperate, and that in a manner which left no room for doubt regarding her views. I mean to say, when a girl offered a good man's heart, laughs like a bursting paper bag, and tells him not to be a silly ass, the good man is entitled, I think, to assume that the whole thing is off. In the light of this announcement in the Times, I could only suppose that on one of these occasions, unnoticed by me possibly because my attention had wandered, she must have dropped her eyes and come through with a murmured, "Oh, righto," though when this could have happened, I hadn't the foggiest. It was accordingly, as you will readily imagine, a Bertram Wooster with dark circles under his eyes and a brain threatening to come apart at the seams, who braked the sports model on the following afternoon at the front door of Brinkley Court. A Bertram, in a word, who was asking himself what the dickens all this was about. Nonplussed, more or less, seems to sum it up. It seemed to me that my first move must be to get hold of my fiancée and see if she had anything to contribute in the way of clarifying the situation. As is generally the case at country houses on a fine day, there seemed to be nobody around. In due season the gang would assemble for tea on the lawn, but at the moment I could spot no friendly native to tell me where I might find Bobby. I proceeded, therefore, to roam hither and thither about the grounds and messuage in the hope of locating her, wishing that I had a couple of bloodhounds to aid me in my task, for the Travers' domain is a spacious one, and there was a considerable amount of sunshine above, though none, I need scarcely mention, in my heart. And I was tooling along a mossy path, with the brow a bit wet with honest sweat, when there came to my ears the unmistakable sound of somebody reading poetry to someone, and the next moment I found myself confronting a mixed twosome, who had dropped anchor beneath a shady tree in what is known as a leafy glade. They'd scarcely swum into my ken when the welkin started ringing like billy-o. This was due to the barking of a small dachshund, who now advanced on me with the apparent intention of seeing the colour of my insides. Milder counsels, however, prevailed, and on arriving at journey's end, he merely rose like a rocket and licked me on the chin, seeming to convey the impression that in Bertram Wooster he had found just what the doctor ordered. I've noticed before in dogs this tendency to form a beautiful friendship immediately on getting within sniffing distance of me. Something to do, no doubt, with the characteristic Wooster smell, which for some reason seems to speak to their depths. I tickled him behind the right ear and scratched the base of his spine for a moment or two. Then, these civilities concluded, switched my attention to the poetry group. It was the male half of the sketch who had been doing the reading, a willowy bird of about the tonnage and general aspect of David Niven, with ginger hair and a small moustache. As he was unquestionably not Aubrey Upjohn, I assumed that it must be Willie Cream, and it surprised me a bit to find him dishing out verse. One would have expected a New York playboy, widely publicized as one of the lads, to confine himself to prose, and dirty prose at that. But no doubt these playboys have their softer moments. His companion was a well-stacked young featherweight, who could be none other than the Phyllis Mills, of whom Kipper had spoken. Nice but goofy, Kipper had said, and a glance told me that he was right. One learns as one goes through life to spot goofiness in the other sex with an unerring eye, and this exhibit had a sort of mild, soul's-awakening kind of expression which made it abundantly clear that, while not a super goof like some of the female goofs I'd met, she was quite goofy enough to be going on with. Her whole aspect was that of a girl who, at the drop of a hat, would start talking baby talk. This she now proceeded to do, asking me if I didn't think that Poppet the Dachshund was a sweet little doggy. I assented rather austerely, for I prefer the shorter form more generally used, and she said she supposed that I was Mrs. Travett's nephew, Bertie Wooster, which, as we knew, was substantially the case. "I heard you were expected today. I'm Phyllis Mills," she said. And I said I had divined as much, and that Kipper had told me to slap her on the back and give her his best. And she said, "Oh, Reggie Herring, he's a sweetie pie, isn't he?" And I agreed that Kipper was one of the sweetie pies, and not the worst of them, and she said, "Yes, he's a lambkin." This duologue had, of course, left Wilbert Cream a bit out of it, just painted on the backdrop, as you might say, and for some moments, knitting his brow, plucking at his moustache, shuffling the feet, and allowing the limbs to twitch, he'd been giving abundant evidence that, in his opinion, 3 was a crowd, and that what the Leafy Glade needed to make it all that a Leafy Glade should be was a complete absence of Woosters. Taking advantage of a lull in the conversation, he said, "Are you looking for somebody?" I replied that I was looking for Bobby Wickham. "I'd go on looking if I were you. Bound to find her somewhere." "Bobby," said Phyllis Mills, "she's down at the lake fishing." "Then what you do," said Wilbert Cream, brightening, "is follow this path, bend right, sharp left, bend right again, and there you are. You can't miss. Start at once is my advice." I must say I felt that, related as I was by ties of blood, in a manner of speaking, to this leafy glade, it was a bit thick being practically bounced from it by a mere visitor. But Aunt Dahlia had made it clear that the Cream family must not be thwarted or put upon in any way. So I did as he suggested, picking up the feet without anything in the nature of backchat. As I receded, I could hear in my rear the poetry breaking out again. The lake at Brinkley calls itself a lake, but when all the returns are in, it's really more a sort of young pond. Big enough to mess about on in a punt, though, and for the use of those wishing to punt, a boathouse has been provided with a small pier or landing stage attached to it. On this, rod in hand, Bobby was seated, and it was with me the work of an instant to race up and breathe down the back of her neck. "Hey," I said. "Hey to you with knobs on," she replied. "Oh, hello, Bertie. You here?" You never spoke a truer word. "If you can spare me a moment of your valuable time, young Roberta—" "Oh, half a second. I think I've got a bite." No, false alarm. What were you saying?" "I was saying— Oh, by the way, I heard from Mother this morning. I heard from her yesterday morning. I was kind of expecting you would. You saw that thing in the Times, with the naked eye. Puzzled you for a moment, perhaps, for several moments. Well, I'll tell you all about that. The idea came to me in a flash." "You mean it was you who shoved that communique in the journal?" "Of course." "Why?" I said, getting right down to it in my direct way. I thought I had her there, but no. "Well, I was paving the way for Reggie." I passed a hand over my fevered brow. "Something seems to have gone wrong with my usually keen hearing," I said. "It sounds just as if you were saying I was paving the way for Reggie." "I was. I was making his path straight, softening up Mother on his behalf." I passed another hand over my FB. "Now you seem to be saying softening up Mother on his behalf. That is what I am saying. It's perfectly simple. I'll put it in words of one syllable for you. I love Reggie. Reggie loves me." Reggie, of course, is 2 syllables, but I let it go. "Reggie who?" "Reggie Herring." I was amazed. "You mean old Kipper?" "I wish you wouldn't call him Kipper. But I always have, dash it," I said with some warmth. "If a fellow shows up at a private school on the south coast of England with a name like Herring, what else do you expect his playmates to call him?" "But how do you mean you love him and he loves you? You've never met him." "Of course I've met him. We were in the same hotel in Switzerland last Christmas. I taught him to ski," she said, a dreamy look coming into her twin starlight. "I shall never forget the day I helped him unscramble himself after he'd taken a toss on the beginner's slopes. He'd both legs wrapped round his neck. I think that's when love dawned. My heart melted as I sorted him out." "You didn't laugh?" "Of course I didn't laugh. I was all sympathy and understanding." For the first time, the thing began to seem plausible to me. Bobby is a fun-loving girl, and the memory of her reaction when in the garden at Scolding's I had once stepped on the teeth of a rake and had the handle jump up and hit me on the tip of the nose was still laid away among my souvenirs. She had been convulsed with mirth. If, then, she had refrained from guffawing when confronted with the spectacle of Reginald Herring with both legs wrapped round his neck, her emotions must have been very deeply involved. "Well, all right," I said. "I accept your statement that you and Kipper are that way. But why, that being so, did you blazon it forth to the world, if blazoning forth is the expression I want, that you were engaged to me?" "Well, I told you it was to soften Mother up." Which sounded to me like delirium straight from the sickbed. You don't get the subtle strategy? Not by several persangs. Well, you know how you stand with Mother. Our relations are a bit distant. She shudders at the mention of your name. So I thought, if she thought I was going to marry you, and then found I wasn't, she'd be so thankful for the merciful escape I'd had, that she'd be ready to accept anyone as a son-in-law, even someone like Reggie, who, though a wonder man, hasn't got his name in Debrett, and isn't any too hot financially. Mother's idea of a mate for me has always been a well-to-do millionaire or a duke with a large private income. Now do you follow? Ah. Oh, yes, I follow all right. You've been doing what Jeeves does, study the psychology of the individual. But do you think it'll work? It's bound to. Let's take a parallel case. Suppose your Aunt Dahlia read in the paper one morning that you were going to be shot at sunrise. Well, I couldn't be. I'm never up so early. But suppose she did. She'd be pretty worked up about it, wouldn't she? Well, extremely, one imagines, for she loves me dearly. I'm not saying her manner towards me doesn't verge at times on the brusque. In childhood days she would occasionally clamp me on the side of the head. Since I've grown to riper years, she has more than once begged me to tie a brick around my neck and go and drown myself in the pond in the kitchen garden. Nevertheless, she loves her Bertram, and if she heard I was to be shot at sunrise, she would, as you say, be as sore as a gumboil. But why? What's that got to do with it? Well, suppose she then found out it was all a mistake, and it wasn't you, but somebody else who was to face the firing squad. That would make her happy, wouldn't it? One can picture her dancing all over the place on the tip of her toes. Exactly. She'd be so all over you that nothing you did would be wrong in her eyes. Whatever you wanted to do would be all right by her. Go to it, she would say. And that's how Mother will feel when she learns that I'm not marrying you after all. She will be so relieved. I agreed that the relief would, of course, be stupendous. But you'll be giving her the inside facts in a day or two, I said, for I was anxious to have assurance on this point. A man with an engagement notice in the Times hanging over him cannot but feel uneasy. Call it in a week or two. No sense in rushing things. You want me to sink in? That's the idea. And meanwhile, what's the drill? Do I kiss you a good deal from time to time? No, you don't. Oh, right-ho, I just wanted to know where I stand. An occasional passionate glance will be ample. Well, it shall be attended to. Well, I'm delighted about you and Kipper, or as you would prefer to say, Reggie. There's nobody I'd rather see you centre-isling it with. It's very sporting of you to take it all like this. Oh, don't give it a thought. I'm awfully fond of you, Bertie. Me too of you. But I can't marry everybody, can I? I wouldn't even try. Well, now that we've got all that straight, I suppose I'd better be going and saying, come aboard to Aunt Dahlia. What's the time? Close on 5. Oh, I must run like a hare. I'm supposed to be presiding at the tea table. You? Why you? Your aunt's not here. She found a telegram when she got back yesterday saying that her son Bonzo was sick of a fever at his school and dashed off to be with him. She asked me to be deputy hostess for her till her return, but I shan't be able to for the next few days. I've got to dash back to Mother. Ever since she saw that thing in the Times, she's been writing me every hour on the hour to come home for a round-table conference. What's a guffin? I don't know, why? Well, that's what she calls you in her latest gram. Quote, cannot understand how you can be contemplating marrying that guffin. Close quote. I suppose it's more or less the same as a gabby, which was how you figured in one of her earlier communications. Ah, yeah, well, that sounds promising. Yes, I think the thing's in the bag. After you, Reggie will come to her like rare and refreshing fruit. She'll lay down the red carpet for him. And with a brief whoopee, she shot off in the direction of the house at 40 or so mph. I followed more slowly, for she'd given me much food for thought, and I was musing. Strange I was feeling, this strong pro-Kipper sentiment in the Wickham bosom. I mean, consider the facts. What with that espièglerie of hers, which was tops, she had been pretty excessively wooed in one quarter or another for years, and no business had resulted, so that it was generally assumed that only something extra special in the way of suitors would meet her specifications, and that whoever eventually got his nose under the wire would be a king among men and pretty warm stuff. And she had gone and signed up with Kipper Herring. Mind you, I'm not saying a word against old Kipper, the salt of the earth, but nobody could have called him a knockout in the way of looks. Having gone in a lot for boxing from his earliest years, he had the cauliflower ear of which I had spoken to Aunt Dahlia, and in addition to this, a nose which some hidden hand had knocked slightly out of the straight. He would, in short, have been an unsafe entrant to have backed in a beauty contest, even if the only other competitors had been Boris Karloff, King Kong, and Oofy Prosser of the drones. But then, of course, one had to remind oneself that looks aren't everything. A cauliflower ear can hide a heart of gold, as in Kipper's case it did, his being about as gold as they come. His brain, too, might have helped to do the trick. You can't hold down an editorial post on an important London weekly paper without being fairly well fixed with the old grey cells, and girls admire that sort of thing. And one had to remember that most of the bimbos to whom Roberta Wickham had been giving the bird through the years had been of the hunting, shooting, and fishing type. Fellows who had more or less shot their bolt after saying, "Eh, what?" and slapping their leg with a hunting crop. Kipper must have come as a nice change. Still, the whole thing provided, as I say, food for thought. And I was in what is called a reverie as I made my way to the house. A reverie so profound that no turf accountant would have given any but the shortest odds against my sooner or later bumping into something. And this, to cut a long story, I did. It might have been a tree, a bush, or a rustic seat. In actual fact, it turned out to be Aubrey Upjohn. I came on him round a corner and rammed him squarely before I could put the brakes on. I clutched him round the neck, and he clutched me about the middle, and for some moments we tottered to and fro, linked in a close embrace. Then, the mists clearing from my eyes, I saw who it was that I had been treading the measure with. Seeing him steadily, and seeing him whole, as I have heard Jeeves put it, I was immediately struck by the change that had taken place in his appearance since those get-togethers in his study at Malvern House, Bramley-on-Sea, when, with a sinking heart, I had watched him reach for the wang-ee and start limbering up the shoulder muscles with a few trial swings. At that period of our acquaintance, he had been an upstanding old gentleman, about 8 feet 6 in height, with burning eyes, foam-flecked lips, and flame coming out of both nostrils. He had now shrunk to a modest 5'7", or thereabouts, and I could have felled him with a single blow. Not that I did, of course, but I regarded him without a trace of the old trepidation. It seemed incredible that I could ever have considered this human shrimp a danger to pedestrians and traffic. I think this was partly due to the fact that at some point in the 15 years since our last meeting he'd grown a moustache. In the Malvern House epoch, what had always struck a chill into the plastic mind had been his wide, bare upper lip, a most unpleasant spectacle to behold, especially when twitching. I wouldn't say the moustache softened his face, but being of the walrus or soup strainer type, it hid some of it, which was all to the good. The upshot was that instead of quailing, as I had expected to do when we met, I was suave and debonair, possibly a little too much so. "Oh, hello, Upjohn," I said. "You-hoo." "Who you?" he responded, making it sound like a reverse echo. Wooster's the name." "Oh, Wooster," he said, as if he'd been hoping it would be something else, and one could understand his feelings, of course. No doubt he, like me, had been buoying himself up for years with the thought that we should never meet again, and that whatever Brickbat's life might have in store for him, he had at least got Bertram out of his system. A nasty jar it must have been for the poor bloke having me suddenly pop up from a trap like this. Long time since we met," I said. "Yes," he agreed in a hollow voice, and it was so plain that he was wishing it had been longer that conversation flagged, and there wasn't much in the way of feasts of reason and flows of the soul as we covered the 100 yards to the lawn where the tea-table awaited us. I think I might have said, "Nice day, what?" and he may have grunted, but nothing more. Only Bobby was present when we arrived at the trough. Wilbert and Phyllis were presumably still in the leafy glade, and Mrs. Cream, Bobby said, worked in her room every afternoon on her new spine freezer and seldom knocked off for a cuppa. We seated ourselves and had just started sipping when the butler came out of the house bearing a bowl of fruit and hove to beside the table with it. Well, when I say butler, I use the term loosely. He was dressed like a butler, and he behaved like a butler. But in the deepest and truest sense of the word, he was not a butler. Reading from left to right, he was Sir Roderick Glossop. Chapter 4. At the Drones Club and other places I am accustomed to frequent, you will often hear comment on Bertram Wooster's self-control, or sang-froid, as it is sometimes called, and it is generally agreed that this is considerable. In the eyes of many people, I suppose, I seem one of those men of chilled steel that you read about, and I'm not saying that I'm not. But it is possible to find a chink in my armour, and this can be done by suddenly springing eminent loony doctors on me in the guise of butlers. It was out of the queue that I could have been mistaken in supposing that it was Sir Roderick Glossop, who, having delivered the fruit, was now ambling back to the house. There could not be two men with that vast bald head and those bushy eyebrows, and it would be deceiving the customers to say that I remained unshaken. The effect the apparition had on me was to make me start violently, and we all know what happens when you start violently while holding a full cup of tea. The contents of mine flew through the air and came to rest on the trousers of Aubrey Upjohn, M.A., moistening them to no little extent. Indeed, it would scarcely be distorting the facts to say that he was now not so much wearing trousers as wearing tea. I could see the unfortunate man felt his position deeply, and I was surprised that he contented himself with a mere "ouch!" But I suppose these solid citizens have to learn to curb the tongue. Creates a bad impression, I mean, if they start blinding and stiffing, as those more happily placed would be. But words are not always needed. In the look he now shot at me, I seemed to read 100 unspoken expletives. It was the sort of look the bucko mate of a tramp steamer would have given an able-bodied seaman who, for one reason or another, had incurred his displeasure. "I see you've not changed since you were with me at Malvern House," he said in an extremely nasty voice, dabbing at the trousers with his handkerchief. "Bungling Wooster, we used to call him," he went on, addressing his remarks to Bobby, and evidently trying to enlist her sympathy. "He could not perform the simplest action, such as holding a cup, without spreading ruin and disaster on all sides. It was an axiom at Malvern House that if there was a chair in any room in which he happened to be, Wooster would trip over it. 'The child,' said Aubrey Upjohn, 'is the father of the man.'" Frightfully sorry," I said. "Too late to be sorry now. A new pair of trousers ruined. It is doubtful if anything can remove the stain of tea from white flannel. Still, one must hope for the best." Whether I was right or wrong at this point in patting him on the shoulder and saying, "Aha, that's the spirit," I find it difficult to decide. Wrong, probably, for it didn't seem to soothe. He gave me another of those looks and strode off, smelling strongly of tea. "Shall I tell you something, Bertie?" said Bobby, following him with a thoughtful eye. "That walking tour Upjohn was going to invite you to take with him is off. You'll get no Christmas present from him this year, and don't expect him to come and tuck you up in bed tonight." I upset the milk jug with an imperious wave of the hand. Never mind about Upjohn and Christmas presents and walking tours. What is Pop Glossop doing here as the butler?" "Ah, I thought you might be going to ask that. I was meaning to tell you sometime." "Tell me now." "Well, it was his idea." I eyed her sternly. Bertram Wooster has no objection to listening to drivel, but it must not be pure babble from the padded cell, as this appeared to be. "His idea?" "Yes." "Are you asking me to believe that Sir Roderick Glossop got up one morning, gazed at himself in the mirror, thought he was looking a little pale, and said to himself, 'I need a change. I think I'll try being a butler for a while'?" "No, not that, but I don't know where to begin." "Begin at the beginning." "Come on now, young B. Wickham, smack into it," I said, and I took a piece of cake in a marked manner. The austerity of my tone seemed to touch a nerve and kindle the fire that always slept in this vermilion-headed menace to the common weal, for she frowned a displeased frown and told me for heaven's sake to stop goggling like a dead halibut. "I have every right to goggle like a dead halibut," I said coldly, "and I shall continue to do so as long as I see fit. I am under a considerable nervous S. As always seems to happen when you're mixed up in the doings, life has become one damn thing after another, but I think I am justified in demanding an explanation. I await your statement." Well, let me marshal my thoughts. She did so, and after a brief intermission, during which I finished my piece of cake, proceeded. I'd better begin by telling you about Upjohn, because it all started with him. You see, he is egging Phyllis on to marry Wilbert Cream. When you say egging, I mean egging. And when a man like that eggs, something has to give, especially when the girl's a pill like Phyllis, who always does what Daddy tells her. No will of her own? Not a smidgen. To give you an instance, a couple of days ago he took her to Birmingham to see the Repertory Company's performance of Chekhov's Seagull, because he thought it would be educational. I'd like to catch anyone trying to make me see Chekhov's Seagull. But Phyllis just bowed her head and said, "Yes, Daddy." Didn't even attempt to put up a fight. That'll show you how much of a will of her own she's got. It did indeed. Her story impressed me profoundly. I knew Chekhov's Seagull. My Aunt Agatha once made me take her son Foss to a performance of it at the Old Vic, and what with the strains of trying to follow cockeyed goings-on of characters called Zarechnaya and Medvienko, and having to be constantly on the alert to prevent Foss making a sneak for the great open spaces, my suffering had been intense. I needed no further evidence to tell me that Phyllis Mills was a girl whose motto would always be, "Daddy knows best." Wilbert had only got to propose and she would sign on the dotted line because Upjohn wished it. Your aunt's worried sick about it. She doesn't approve? Of course she doesn't approve. You must have heard of Willie Cream going over to New York so much. Why, yes, news of his escapades has reached me. He's a playboy. Your aunt thinks he's a screwball. Many playboys are, I believe. Well, that being so, one can understand why she doesn't want those wedding bells to ring out. But, I said, putting my finger on the res in my unerring way, that doesn't explain where Pop Glossop comes in. Yes, it does. She got him here to observe Wilbert. I found myself fogged. Cock an eye at him, do you mean? Drink him in, as if it were? What good's that going to do? She snorted impatiently. Observe, in the technical sense. You know how these brain specialists work. They watch the subject closely. They engage him in conversation. They apply subtle tests, and sooner or later... I begin to see. Sooner or later he lets fall an incautious word to the effect that he thinks he's a poached egg. And then they've got him where they want him, Well, he does something which tips them off. Your aunt was moaning to me about the situation, and I suddenly had this inspiration of bringing Glossop here. You know how I get these sudden inspirations. Yeah, I do. That hot water bottle episode. Yes, that was one of them. Ha! What did you say? Ha? Why, ha? Because when I think of that night of terror, I feel like saying, ha. She seemed to see the justice of this, pausing merely to eat a cucumber sandwich. She proceeded. So I said to your aunt, I'll tell you what to do, I said. Get Glossop here, I said, and have him observe Wilbert Cream. Then you'll be in a position to go to Upjohn and pull the rug from under him. Again I was not abreast. There had been, as far as I could recollect, no mention of any rug. How do you mean? Well, isn't it obvious? Rope in old Glossop, I said, and let him observe. Then you'll be in a position, I said, to go to Upjohn and tell him that Sir Roderick Glossop, the greatest alienist in England, is convinced that Wilbert Cream is round the bend, and to ask him if he proposes to marry his stepdaughter to a man who at any moment may be marched off and added to the membership list of Coney Hatch. Even Upjohn would shrink from doing a thing like that. Or don't you think so? I weighed this. Yes, I said. I should imagine you were right. Quite possibly Upjohn has human feelings, though I never noticed them when I was in statu populare, as I believe the expression is. One sees now why Glossop is at Brinkley Court. What one does not see is why one finds him buttling. Well, I told you that was his idea. He thought he was such a celebrated figure that it would arouse Mrs. Cream's suspicion if he came here under his own name. I see what you mean. She would catch him observing Wilbert and wonder why, and eventually put two and two together and start, hey, what's the big idea-ing? Exactly. No mother likes to find that her hostess has got a brain specialist down to observe the son who is the apple of her eye. It hurts her feelings. Whereas if she catches the butler observing him, she merely says to herself, an observant butler. Very sensible. With this deal, Uncle Tom's got on with Homer Cream. It would be fatal to risk giving her the pip in any way. She would kick to Homer, and Homer would draw himself up and say, after what has occurred, Travers, I would prefer to break off the negotiations. And Uncle Tom would lose a packet. What is this deal they've got on, by the way? Did Aunt Dahlia tell you? Yes, but it didn't penetrate. It's something to do with some land your uncle owns somewhere, and Mr. Cream is thinking of buying it and putting up hotels and things. It doesn't matter anyway. The fundamental thing, the thing to glue the eye on, is that the Cream contingent have to be kept sweetened at any cost, so not a word to a soul. Quite. Bertram Wooster is not a babbler. No spiller of the beans. But why are you so certain that Wilbert Cream is loopy? He doesn't look loopy to me. Have you met him? Just for a moment. He was in a leafy glade reading poetry to the Mills girl. She took this big. Reading poetry? To Phyllis? That's right. I thought it rather odd that a chap like him should be doing such things. Limericks, yes. If he'd been reciting limericks to her, I could have understood it. But this was stuff from one of those books they bind in limp purple leather and sell at Christmas. I wouldn't care to swear to it, but it sounded to me extremely like Omar Khayyam. She continued to take it big. Break it up, Bertie, break it up. There's not a moment to be lost. You must go and break it up immediately. Who, me? Why me? That's what you're here for. Didn't your aunt tell you? She wants you to follow Wilbert Cream and Phyllis about everywhere and see that he doesn't get a chance of proposing. You mean that I'm to be a sort of private eye or Seamus tailing them up? But I don't like it, I said dubiously. Look, you don't have to like it, said Bobby. You just do it. Chapter 5. Wax in the hands of the other sex, as the expression is. I went and broke it up as directed, but not blithely. It's never pleasant for a man of sensibility to find himself regarded as a Batinsky and a trailing arbutus, and it was thus, I could see, at a G, that Wilbur Cream was penciling me in. At the moment of my arrival, he had suspended the poetry reading and had taken Phyllis's hand in his, evidently saying, or about to say, something of an intimate and tender nature. Hearing my what-ho, he turned hurriedly, released the fin, and directed me a look very similar to the one I had recently received from Aubrey Upjohn. He muttered something under his breath about someone whose name I didn't catch, apparently having been paid to haunt the place. "Oh, it's you again," he said. Well, of course it was. No argument about that. "Kind of at a loose end," he said. "Why don't you settle down somewhere with a good book?" I explained that I had just popped in to tell them tea was now being served on the main lawn, and Phyllis squeaked a bit as if agitated. "Oh, dear," she said, "I must run. Daddy doesn't like me to be late for tea. He says it's not respectful to my elders." I could see trembling on Wilbert Cream's lips a suggestion as to where Daddy could stick himself and his views on respect to elders, but with a powerful effort he held it back. "I shall take Poppet for a walk," he said, chirruping to the dachshund who was sniffing at my legs, filling his lungs with the delicious Wooster bouquet. "No tea," I said. "No." "There are muffins." "Ha!" he ejaculated, if that's the word, and strode off, followed by the low-slung dog. And it was borne in upon me that here was another source from which I could expect no present at Yuletide. His whole demeanour made it plain that I had not added to my little circle of friends. Though going like a breeze with dachshunds, I had failed signally to click with Wilbert Cream. When Phyllis and I reached the lawn, only Bobby was at the tea-table, and this surprised us both. "Where's Daddy?" Phyllis asked. "He suddenly decided to go to London," said Bobby. "To London?" "That's what he said." "Why?" "He didn't tell me." "Well, I must go and see him," said Phyllis, and buzzed off. Bobby seemed to be musing. "Do you know what I think, Bertie?" "What?" "Well, when Upjohn came out just now, he was all of a doodah, and he had this week's Thursday Review in his hand. Came by afternoon post, I suppose. I think he'd been reading Reggie's comment on his book." Ah, this seemed to be plausible. "I number several authors among my acquaintance. The name of Boko Fittleworth is one that springs to mind, and they invariably become all of a doodah when they read a stinker in the press about their latest effort." "Oh, you know about that thing Kipper wrote?" "Yes, he showed it to me one day when we were having lunch together." Very mordant, I gathered from what he told me. But I don't see why that should make Upjohn bound up to London. Well, I suppose he wants to ask the editor who wrote the thing, so that he can horsewhip him on the steps of his club. But of course they won't tell him, and it wasn't signed, so... "Oh, hello, Mrs. Cream." The woman she was addressing was tall and thin, with a hawk-like face that reminded me of Sherlock Holmes. She had an ink spot on her nose, the result of working on her novel of suspense. It's virtually impossible to write a novel of suspense without getting a certain amount of ink on the beezer. Ask Aunt Agatha or anyone. "I finished my chapter a moment ago, so I thought I'd stop for a cup of tea," said this litterateuse. "No good overdoing it." "No, quit when you're ahead of the game, that's the idea. This is Mrs. Travis' nephew, Bertie Wooster," said Bobby, with what I considered a far too apologetic note in her voice. If Roberta Wickham has one fault more pronounced than another, it is that she is inclined to introduce me to people as if I was something that she would much have preferred to hush up. "Bertie loves your books," she added, quite unnecessarily, and the cream started like a Boy Scout at the sound of a bugle. "Oh, do you? Never happier than when curled up with one of them," I said, trusting that she wouldn't ask me which one I liked best. "When I told him you were here, he was overcome." "Well, that certainly is great. Always glad to meet the fans. Which of my books do you like best?" And I had got as far as and was wondering, though not with much hope, if all of them would meet the case, when Pop Glossop joined us with a telegram for Bobby on a salver. From her mother, I presumed, calling me some name that she'd forgotten to insert in previous communications. Or, of course, possibly expressing once more her conviction that I was a guffin, which I thought, having had time to ponder over it, would be something in the nature of a bohunkus or hammerhead. "Oh, thank you, Swordfish," said Bobby, taking the gram. It was fortunate that I was not holding a teacup as she spoke, for hearing Sir Roderick thus addressed, I gave another of my sudden starts, and, had I had such a cup in my hand, must have strewn its contents hither and thither like a sower going forth sowing. As it was, I merely sent a cucumber sandwich flying through the air. "Oh, sorry," I said, for it had missed the cream by a hair's breadth. I could have relied on Bobby to shove her oar in. The girl had no notion of passing a thing off. "Excuse it, please," she said. "I ought to have warned you. Bertie is training for the Jerk the Cucumber Sandwich event in the next Olympic Games. He has to be practicing all the time." On Ma Cream's brow there was a thoughtful wrinkle, as though she felt unable to accept this explanation of what had occurred. But her next few words showed that it was not on my activities that her mind was dwelling, but on the recent Swordfish. Having followed him with a keen glance as he faded from view, she said, "This butler of Mrs. Travis, do you know where she got him, Miss Wickham?" "At the usual pet shop, I think." "Had she references?" "Oh, yes. He was with Sir Roderick Glossop, the brain specialist, for years. I remember Mrs. Travis saying Sir Roderick gave him a super-colossal reference. She was greatly impressed." Ma Cream sniffed. "References can be forged." "Oh, good gracious, why do you say that?" "Because I'm not at all easy in my mind about this man. He has a criminal face." "Well, you might say that about Bertie." "I feel that Mrs. Travis should be warned. In my blackness at night, the butler turned out to be one of a gang of crooks, planted in the house to make it easy for them to break in. The Inside Stand is called. I strongly suspect that this is why this Swordfish is here. Though, of course, it's quite possible that he's working on his own. One thing I'm sure of, and that is that he's not a genuine butler." "Well, what makes you think that?" I asked, handkerchiefing my upper slopes, which had become considerably bedewed. I didn't like this line of talk at all. Let the cream get firmly in her nut the idea that Sir Roderick Glossop was not the butler, the whole butler, and nothing but the butler, and disaster, as I saw it, loomed. She would probe and investigate, and before you could say "what ho," would be in full possession of the facts. In which event, bim would go Uncle Tom's chance of scooping in a bit of easy money. And ever since I've known him, failure to get his hooks on any stray cash that's floating around has always put him out of touch with the rhubarb. It isn't that he's mercenary, it's just that he loves the stuff. Her manner suggested that she was glad I'd asked her that. Well, I will tell you what makes me think it. He betrays his amateurishness in 100 ways. This very morning I found him having a long conversation with Wilbert. A real butler would never do that. He would feel it was a liberty. I contested this statement. "Now, there," I said, "I take issue with you, if taking issue means what I think it means. Many of my happiest hours have been passed chatting with butlers, and it has always happened that it was they who first made the advances. They seek me out and tell me all about their rheumatism. Swordfish looks all right to me. You are not a student of criminology, as I am. I have the trained eye, and my judgment is never wrong. That man is here for no good." I could see that all this was making Bobby chafe, but her better self prevailed, and she checked the heated retort. She is very fond of tea, poor Tarlington Travers, who, she tells me, is the living image of a wire-haired terrier now residing with the Morning Stars, but at one time very dear to her. and she remembered that for his sake the cream had to be deferred to and handled with kid gloves. When she spoke, it was with the mildness of a cushat dove addressing another cushat dove from whom it was hoping to borrow money. "But don't you think, Mrs. Cream, that it may be just your imagination? You have such a wonderful imagination. Bertie was saying only the other day that he didn't know how you did it. Write all those frightfully imaginative books, I mean, weren't you, Bertie? My very words. And if you have imagination, you can't help imagining, can you, Bertie? No, dash difficult." Her honeyed words were wasted. The Cream continued to dig her toes in like Balaam's ass, of whom you have doubtless heard. "I am not imagining that butler is up to something fishy," she said tartly, "and I should have thought it was pretty obvious what that something was. You seem to have forgotten that Mr. Travers has one of the finest collections of old silver in England." Now, this was correct. Owing possibly to some flaw in his mental makeup, Uncle Tom has been collecting old silver since I was so high, and I suppose the contents of the room on the ground floor where he parks the stuff are worth a princely sum. I knew all about that collection of his, not only because I'd had to listen to him for hours on the subject of sconces, foliation, ribbon wreaths in high relief, and gadroon borders, but because I had what you might call a personal interest in it, once having stolen an 18th century cow creamer for him. Long story, no time to go into it now. You'll find it elsewhere in the archives. Mrs. Travers was showing it to Willie the other day, and he was thrilled. Willie collects old silver himself. With each hour that passed, I was finding it more and more difficult to get a toehold on the character of W. Cream. An in-and-out performer, if ever there was one. First of all, that poetry, I mean, and now this. I'd always supposed that playboys didn't give a hoot for anything except blondes and cold bottles. It just showed once again that half the world doesn't know how the other three-quarters lives. He says there are a number of things in Mr. Travers' collection that he would give his back teeth for. This was an 18th century cow creamer he particularly coveted. So keep your eye on that, butler. I am certainly going to keep mine." "Well," said the Cream, rising, "I must be getting back to my work. I always like to rough out a new chapter before finishing for the day." She licked it, and for a moment silence reigned. Then Bobby said, "Phew," and I agreed that phew was the mot juste. "We'd better get Glossop out of here quick," I said. "Well, how can we? It's up to your aunt to do that, and she's away. Then I'm jolly well going to get out myself. There's too much impending doom buzzing around these parts for my taste. Brinkley Court, once a peaceful country house, has become like something sinister out of Edgar Allan Poe, and it makes my feet cold. I am leaving. Look, you can't till your aunt gets back. There has to be some sort of host and hostess here, and I simply must go home tomorrow and see Mother. You'll have to clench your teeth and stick it. And the severe mental strain to which I am being subjected doesn't matter, I suppose. Not a bit. Does you good. Keeps your pores open." I should probably have said something pretty cutting in reply to this if I could have thought of anything, but as I couldn't, I didn't. "What's Aunt Dahlia's address?" I said. "Royal Hotel, Eastbourne. Why?" "Because," I said, taking another cucumber sandwich, "I am going to wire her to ring me up tomorrow without fail, so that I can apprise her of what's going on in this joint."